a great pleasure to invite the next speaker. She's a good friend, Professor Karen Avraham. She's from Israel, from the Sackler Faculty of Medicine. Actually, she's the vice dean there, and I heard she's doing all the work because the dean is a man. Right, Karen? From Tel Aviv University, and Karen is in the Faculty of Medicine, but she is a biologist, so she will give the view of Nancy Hopkins. The shoes are not too big for you, right? So come on.
Such a pleasure to be here. And Chagit, thank you so much for inviting me. Really an honor to be part of this group. So I've decided what I was going to do is give you a timeline. And this timeline is not so much geared, I have to tell you, for the full professors in the audience, but actually for the younger women in the audience and those that hopefully aren't here that will watch this afterwards, to show you that it can be done. And I don't know if I'm going to say that it's relatively easy, but I don't know if it's relatively easy for a man either. But I want to share with you my experience, but put it into the context of what happens in the rest of the field, because it's certainly, there are some unique things and others that are not. So you may be able to tell, I just celebrated my 50th birthday last week. Thank you. I was born in Granby, Quebec, Canada. That's not where the accent is from. That's me in an incubator. I was 2 months premature. When I was 4, we moved to the United States, and actually I lived there my formative years for my language, which is probably why I fortunately still have this accent. You can see that early on I was interested in reading. You can notice the fashion statement with the shoes as well. And I graduated high school in 1980. Very interested in science. It was clear I was going to go in that direction. I was in all the honors classes. I dabbled in art for a little while, and if you meet my mother, she will still tell you that it's a great disappointment that I'm not an artist because I was very talented, and she has several of my paintings in her house. I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis, and there I really had an incredible experience because I started doing research in a laboratory. You can see me there in the bottom. I was actually pre-med, fell in love with research, and decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I graduated in 1984, and from then, at that point, I had gone during a year of college. I had come to Israel for a year exchange, and decided I wanted to stay in Israel, and I applied to the Weizmann Institute and was very fortunate to have gotten in. And I started my PhD there. It was a period of 6 years, an incredible 6 years, because this was clearly when I got the tools to decide what it was that I wanted to do in my life. And there were several key points, and I think that one of the most important ones were mentors. So at every step along the way, I've had mentors, not only women, also men, but people who really guided me, who taught me, and who made me believe that it was possible for me to do it. In 1988, you can see that cute little guy who's now 24. That was my son Daniel was born. And I graduated from the Weizmann Institute in 1990 and went from there to do a postdoc at the National Cancer Institute. I was there for 5 years. My interest in mice, you can see there on Halloween with my son. And I decided to specialize in mouse genetics. And I worked with Nancy Jenkins and Neil Copeland, but I have to say that Nancy was clearly one of my mentors. As a woman scientist, she had accomplished an enormous amount and, again, really showed you that it can be done. I decided to come back to Israel, and I started in 1996 as an assistant professor, also called here a senior lecturer at Tel Aviv University. I was promoted after a not too long a time to associate professor. I then became chair of the department, and then I was promoted after really a very relatively short time to full professor. I'm now vice dean, as Chagit mentioned. I will say that there are 5 vice deans, but I'm the preclinical vice dean. As a PhD, I'm in charge of everything that's not directly medically related. I was very fortunate to win 2 very prestigious prizes. And today, I have, I think, a wonderful, wonderful, successful lab. I've had many manuscripts, reviews, chapters. I've mentored over 60 students. I will tell you that 45 of those have been women. I think that women tend to go to women more. And I want to just share with you my perspective on this route that I had. So the point that I want to make here is everything really went well. Personally, from my own personal experience, I never encountered what I perceived as problems. If there were problems, people didn't tell me about them. They didn't share them with me. I didn't have that 5-second moment that we heard a few minutes ago. I didn't have those kind of epiphanies. Now, it may have to do with the environment that I was in. First of all, I had a very successful mother. To this day, she's a very successful businesswoman in New Jersey. Actually, after 55 years, moved back to Israel. And there was nothing that I couldn't do. It just wasn't even in our vocabulary. And I realized I must have raised my son right when he said to me, "Why can't Hillary Clinton be president?" It didn't even dawn on him that a woman could not be president. Maybe someone wouldn't want Hillary Clinton specifically, but certainly from that perspective, he couldn't even understand it. So I've grown up in a world of equal opportunity when you could do anything that you wanted. I also chose an area of genetics, biology, where there tend to be more women. Women tend to more go into, and we've heard this already before, into biology, into medical sciences, specifically genetics, areas that are less math intense, and the goal is to help people. I wanted to be a physician and then decided to do research, so I think the first step would have perhaps been more helping people, and I was going to major in math. I just simply thought that doing research in biology was more exciting, so I had the skills in math. So I don't think that that's what put me in one area or the other, but we're certainly seeing a trend. And the message that I want to give by this timeline is not just, not necessarily to show you what it is that I've accomplished, but more than it can be done. And I do think it's getting easier, but there are a couple of caveats here. First of all, in the United States, there are about 86,000 biology graduates a year. However, the starting salary in biology is $40,000 to $50,000 a year. In computer science, it's $55,000 to $65,000. So women have a tendency to put themselves in fields that are making less money. There are studies showing that, for example, women ask for less money when they're applying for a job, so similar to what we heard a few moments ago. But only 14% find tenure-track academic positions within 6 years, and that's talking across the board. And as you already saw, the situation is much worse for women. Now, what are the reasons that this actually exists? I think that it's important for women to ask themselves what it is they want to do in their life. I never questioned what I wanted to do in my life. I never thought I was going to do one thing or another or not do it because I was a woman. I don't have, the right control because I'm not a man. But in my world, it was never an issue. But it clearly is an issue all around me. And it's that question that I'm concerned about. And I wonder why people question it. Now, there's some very practical reasons. And the most practical one is we live in a very difficult society that still has opinions like the study that came out October 9th, 2012 in PNAS. I actually find it shocking. I would like to think that the younger generation of men now who would be evaluating a woman versus a male technician to hire, laboratory assistant to hire, would look at things differently. Who were they pooling? What was the age group of the people pooling? So maybe it's going to change. But I don't necessarily know that because, as was said, this is traditions and thoughts that are steeped millennia, and attitudes don't change so quickly. But let me describe what I think that women need to have in order to move forward. They need to have motivation. You can't do anything unless you're motivated, unless you're passionate about what it is that you're going to do. You need to, of course, be smart. We would all admit that to do anything in science, you have to be fairly smart, and it helps to be very smart. The mentors, I can't begin to tell you what an impact it had on my life, and I've had several mentors after Nancy: Karen Steele, Janet Rissant, Mary Claire King, Cynthia Morton, women that were a bit older than me and have subsequently over several years become my colleagues and my friends as that age difference got smaller. But being able to look at those women and see that they could do it made a tremendous difference. So I encourage everyone, and I know already personally, looking at this audience and knowing several women here, that several of you are superb mentors. I've seen it in your subsequent generations that have come out. And it needs to continue because I think that this is the one driving force that really helps, especially young girls. I've tried to have high school students, college students in my lab to push them forward and to help them show them that it really can be done. What are the elements that actually hold women back? First of all, the overriding one that I found is the anxiety of the future. I've polled a number of women in the past couple of weeks who are doing PhDs at Tel Aviv University. So, of course, I'm starting with a biased group. Having said that, there were quite a few differences, but the prevailing one was the women who did not yet have children were very anxious about what would happen when they did. How would they manage financially? How would they juggle it all? How would they be good at everything? And that anxiety is an element that holds them back. Interestingly enough, when I went to the next generation, I went to women who had already recently started a position at Tel Aviv or were chairs of departments at Tel Aviv. Then it was like, yes, it was hard, but we managed. And it wasn't as bad as they imagined once they were going through it. So I think that that's a message that we have to give to young women. But with all of that, there are very practical things that we need to do to help. One of them is we need to give postdoctoral fellowships, specifically for women. I'm not saying that men shouldn't get them. They also should have wonderful opportunities. But there's no question that the financial hardship in a family is often a burden when it's the woman who has to say to the husband, well, you have to take a pay cut or maybe not work for a couple of months or for a year and make that sacrifice for my career because it's really important. And I don't have to tell you that it's much more accepted that a woman will make that sacrifice. So it's usually the woman who, because of the man's career, a woman can't go for a postdoc than vice versa. We're starting to see more and more examples of the opposite, and it's heartwarming to see that. But nevertheless, if there was a substantial postdoctoral fellowship, then we wouldn't stop there. And at the Weizmann Institute, there's, for a number of years already, there's been this effort, and we need it all throughout the country. It's still too small, and we need more of them. So that's a really important thing. We also need acceptance in the academic environment. If a woman has to go home at 4:30 to take care of their kid, because then that's something that has to be accepted. Now, I have to tell you that more and more, and we're seeing the changes, many of my male students also have to go home now at 4:30 to take care of their kid because their wife is working late, or they've both decided that they want to go home and spend time with their children. There has to be acceptance in the home and in the family. There's no question that was prevailing throughout my career was that I had an enormous amount of support in my home and in my extended family. And it was that support and that help that even when the finances weren't always great, that really made a tremendous impact. And so it's very important for all of us, and this is a message to the men and to the audience as well, though this is probably against a biased audience, the fact that you're here, is to provide that support, that it's just as important for a woman to do it as it is for a man. From my perspective and the way I've grown up, there was absolutely no difference, but unfortunately, we see that the reality is it's not quite like that. Now, one of the thing that I've also seen with women today is they do have more of a choice. I think that in earlier years, certainly when my child was very young, it wasn't very fashionable to come in, for example, to have a postdoc interview and say, and right off the bat say, I have a child. You almost had to hide it. You had to be quiet about it. You didn't want to have it too out there because you didn't want them to think, well, that's going to be as much of a priority as work. And we now know today that all across the board in society, our children have become a priority, I think in a way that it never was. I never saw my father before late at night when I was growing up. It was always my mother was there. Even though my mother was a very successful businesswoman, it was very well partitioned in terms of those hours. And those things are changing today. It's much more acceptable. Today, a student in my lab who went for a postdoc, from the beginning she said to the postdoc advisor, this is the way it is, so that you should be aware that it's also really important to me. Now, obviously, there was some selection. The person who didn't like that wasn't where she was going to do her postdoc. And she's an incredible student and has done a very serious PhD. So I think that it's important for women to own up to how they feel about balancing work and family. Do they want to spend a lot more time with their family, more time at work? One of the issues that has always been raised about me is I have one child. And I made a conscious decision to have one child. I would like to tell you that it doesn't have to do with my career. That's my personality. I don't imagine myself with several children. Did it mean that perhaps my life was easier having a career because I had one as opposed to 3 or 4? Perhaps. But I have a friend who has 5, and believe me, she has an easier time with 5 than I had with 1. So all of this is very personality oriented. And I admire the young women today because I think that they understand themselves much better, and they've set the limits for themselves and are much more accepting if they can't be the superwoman at everything. You know, they can't be 1,000%, but that they can try. I did want to end with this, and we've already heard about it. It is shocking. It is shocking that in October 2012 we're still hearing this, but then if you put it on the background of what we heard earlier this evening, it's not, because the numbers are really showing that despite the experience that I had, it was a biased experience because I chose a field, and not for that reason, but it happened to be the field that I went into, in which there tends to be more women. There's more acceptance of women. But clearly, it's not like that. And I saw it with my son when he was in Chemda, which is a high school program for physics. There were, it was 99% boys. And the earliest that we can start encouraging girls that they can do what they want. And it's okay if they don't want to be electrical engineers. Not everyone should be an electrical engineer. But that they can do it, and basically we have to, I think, raise our young girls to realize that they can do absolutely everything they want and then own up to what it is that they want. So, thank you very much.